Okay, did you attend school in Bloomington?
I did. I attended schools in Indiana, Massachusetts, and New York State because my father was moving due to the Korean War. We were called up as an active reservist. We're stationed at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and started school there, and then returned to Bloomington, went to 3 or 4 schools in Bloomington, moved to Oneonta, New York in 57, moved to Johnstown, New York in 64. So I went to those schools, graduated from high school, Johnstown High, June 1965.
Okay, and did you attend college at that point?
I did attend the Fulton Montgomery Community College in Johnstown the fall of 65 until the end of that semester. I guess that'd be the January or so, February of 66, at which time I enlisted in the Air Force and was inducted in Albany into the Air Force for 4 years.
Okay, and why did you pick the Air Force?
When I moved to Johnstown in 64, my father was tapped to be one of the startup faculty and staff of the Fulton Montgomery Community College. It also threw me off my last year of high school as to where I was going to go, what I wanted to do. I was lucky to graduate from high school, basically. It was a pretty difficult time period. And I had nowhere else to go. And at that time, the draft was taking young men, 18 years of age. And so I decided to go to the community college, at least to stay out of the draft and have a student deferment. So that was my default choice. And I stayed in the community college, but I real quickly realized this was not the place for me. I was on academic probation right away. I was playing around, big man on campus, BMOC, and so I saw the handwriting on the wall. I was going to flunk out one way or the other, and so I decided that at that time, with the draft being on, only kids with high school diplomas could enlist in the Air Force and Navy. The Army and Marines were taking anybody and everybody who didn't have a deferment, and if your number got called, you're gone. So I decided to opt for the 4-year enlistment. I took Air Force over Navy because the Navy recruiter in Gloversville was saying something to the effect I can go underneath water for 9 months or 6 months with a nuke sub, and that wasn't my idea of fun. So I chose the Air Force. I could still party, I could get an education, get training, and I probably would avoid Vietnam service. So that was the criteria for my choice for the Air Force. And again, I thought it would keep me out of Vietnam, keep me out of combat arms. I'd get an education, I'd get training, and I wouldn't have to spend most of my service underwater.
Okay, and where did you go for your basic training?
I went to Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas, and was there, again, February through March, maybe April of 66.
Okay, and was that basically your first time away from home?
As far as, I've been in camps and stuff like this, and I spent summers as a kid quite a ways from home with relatives working on farms and that sort of thing. So it wasn't a homesick thing, or it wasn't my first time away from my parents or overnight or anything like that. I spent a lot of nights, a lot of times, a lot of weeks, months away from the family. So it wasn't really, in that respect, the first time away from home, but it was the first time being in the military and being that far away from home and being in so many new situations, but it was pretty easy.
Okay. And after you completed your basic training, where did you go from there?
I had signed in with the Air Force on the agreement that I would, with my AFQT, Air Force Armed Forces Qualification Test, I had signed in for electronics as one of, whatever basic area I had to choose that I wanted to be in, as opposed to either mechanics or admin or electronics, and I was sent to Kastner Air Force Base. My career field was going to be in inertial navigational aids, and I asked for a transfer at a certain point in the early part of the block of training from inertial nav aids to ground-to-air radio communications, which made all the difference in my world, as it turned out, which I didn't realize. But there was another fellow who was in ground-to-air radio communications at the same date, same block, same time of training, and the Air Force guy said they'd never done it before, but they swapped us. So I think I forget the guy's name, but Kastner, I think is this guy's name. He and I swapped, and where I started in one electronic area, I ended up in another, and that made all the difference.
Okay. And what did you learn in that school?
I learned that we could cheat very easily. We would have a test at the end of the block, a block of time that we had a particular class, and I have no idea how this worked out, but somehow we had a pony, which is the name for the crib sheet or something like this, and as we had a test, the answers were available. And again, I don't know how they all got out and where they were. The instructors seemed to say they had no idea how we could ever figure this out. But as we stood in line in front of the door waiting to open for us to go in and take a position, and we would have certain questions at that position, we all knew the answers. So we put ourselves in position. When we walked in, we knew the answers for that particular question, that particular set of questions. So the guy on your right, the guy on your left might have had a different set, but I knew the ones that I was going to be on. So it was easy. It wasn't difficult. It was kind of fun in a way, but I also was on different time periods. We had 6-hour shifts for classes, and so you're on 6 hours, and then you're off the 18. And being in Kastner Air Force Base, we're in Biloxi, Mississippi, and a lot of times we would go downtown to have Coke and donuts, and there's some sort of jukebox place that we used to hang out. And I remember black only or colored sign on the water spigot on the outside of the building, and whites only for the water fountain on the inside of the building. Taking trips to New Orleans from Biloxi on the bus. I read the book Black Like Me, and I took the same exact trip that Griffin took, the author, and experienced what it's like to be second-class citizens in America, whereas the local white people were first class, and they get on the bus first, and then all the blacks hanging around would put us on, and so we went on, but then the black people came on, and they get on last, and we had some experiences where I really understood what it was like to be a Yankee or a damn Yankee in the South, with the white-black racial issues and the tensions that went on. So it was an eye-opening experience, not only from the Air Force point of view and the training, the tech school that we went to, which is basically, again, pretty easy. It was kind of fun and games. But I think a lot of the social and those social issues kind of came up for me pretty quickly in that environment. So that was an interesting, eye-opening experience.
Now, how long was that school?
I think it was 9 months. So I would have been there probably, I think it would have been from about, April or May of 66 until early 67, I believe it would have been.
Okay. And once you graduated from the course, where were you sent?
My first PCS, permanent change of station, was to the 5th Mobile Communications Group at Robbins Air Force Base outside of, it was at Robbins, Georgia, just outside of Macon, Georgia. So I stayed in the South. And we had a bus ride from Biloxi over to Robbins. be able to be there immediately, if not sooner, and set up a communication system for the military and whoever else. We had a 1 hour stateside alert, or 1 hour stateside, which is the eastern coast of the United States, and a 3 hour worldwide alert. We had parts of North Africa and South America were in our area of operation. So again, we had a whole group of guys who were on contingency alert for a period of time, like a day or so. You sit within 15 minutes of a phone call. If you go anywhere, you have to let the charge of quarters, the CQ, know where you're going, how to communicate with you. This is before cell phones. And you had to be ready to go. So that was kind of the lifestyle, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed going temporary duty. We had certain assignments that came up. I always volunteered if I could. A lot of guys in the shop knew if they had families and they didn't want to go somewhere, they always knew to call Engelmann. And often I would go in their place because I just enjoyed the travel. I enjoyed, learning the skills, the problems that we had, all the things that went on with it. So I like to go places.
Now, were you actually working in your MLS?
Yes, I was. And in the Air Force, we don't call it MOS, we call it AFSC. The Air Force, let's see, what do we call it? AFSC, Air Force. Sorry, I forget what the nomenclature stood for. Specialty Code, Air Force Specialty Code, AFSC. It's the same thing as an MOS. And mine was 30454. That's the ground radio communication repair. Okay. And the 5-4 means I'm in the 5th level of skill, which is out of tech school, basically. And within 2 years, which is kind of unheard, which at that time was kind of unheard of in the Air Force, with extra training at the 5th mob, as we call it, a bunch of us got our E4 stripes, or sergeant stripes. And in the Air Force, rank comes real slow. And so you go to tech school, you come out, and basically you languish for a while. You're only in E2, E3, and it takes a while to get your stripes in the Air Force, and the training and the skills and adding paperwork like going on TDYs and getting letters of commendation and stuff. And pretty soon they'll put you in the pipeline and you'll get another stripe. But it comes rather slow. And we got our sergeant stripes 2 years after our enlistment. So that was pretty fast. And so we were a bunch of guys on the fast track just because of the training and the skills and the classes they were offering us that we took them up on. And so that was a helpful thing for us.
Okay. All right. Now, where did you go next?
I spent, like the first year in the Air Force would have been basic and tech school. Mm-hmm. Second year was the 5th mob. I was towards the end of, it would have been 67. I was getting kind of nervous a bit because several of the guys in our shop and our unit were being pulled out and heading over to Vietnam, evidently, as we found out. And there wasn't much of they just were gone. And we didn't know very much about, them leaving, and there wasn't much alert to it. And I was getting kind of a little bit perturbed because I wanted a little bit more control in what was going to happen. I didn't want to just be sitting there like a duck, somebody taking me out of the water. So I ended up volunteering to, if it's going to happen, I was just going to take care of it myself. So I put in my papers to volunteer for Vietnam. And that was in the latter part of 67. Mm-hmm. I went to upstate New York. I went to Johnstown. And Dad and I went deer hunting, and my Thanksgiving leave I took. And while I was in Johnstown, I got the call from the CQ that my orders had come in for Vietnam. And wasn't leaving too soon. I was leaving in March of 68. So when I got back to Robbins, I went through medical checkups and getting things squared away so that I'd be in good shape physically when I went over there, getting your teeth drilled and all that bit, and inoculations and all that. And so in March of 68, I took off and I headed over to Vietnam, and my assignment was with the 3rd Combat Support Group, which was in Bien Hoa, and then stationed further with the 19th Tactical Air Support Squadron, the 19th TAS, out of Bien Hoa. And from that point, the TAS was directing a bunch of us radio communications guys. We were being sent out to FOLs, forward observation locations. These were usually Army base camps that we had a set of radios working with forward air controllers who were pilots who had worked, were fighter pilots who had been, who were flying O-1E bird dogs. And they were directing airstrikes for the Army, and they were putting the 30454s, the radio repair guys, at these base camps, because should anything happen to the radios, we'd know how to fix it. Operators wouldn't know that. So they used us as operators and repairmen at the same time. Sometimes they had some shops at a larger facility, so in case something happened, those guys were just sitting in the shop just working on radios, period. Others of us were working on the radios or with them, calling in airstrikes. We would either be in a radio jeep, a Mark 108, which had an AC/DC system and radios in the back seat, FM, HF, UHF, and VHF to talk from ground to air, ground to ground. And we would be in the boonies with the radio jeep. We had a whole set of those radios in the Tactical Operations Center, the TOC, or we were sometimes in the back seat of the O-1E. Usually not there for directing airstrikes, but often that happened. And so that was the job I did for the next year. I had a couple different assignments in Vietnam, but that's what the job was that I ended up doing.
So you were on flight status then?
Negative. They didn't put us on flying status. We didn't file Form 5s, which is for that purpose. We were passengers only. That's how they referred to us. And the Air Force had various ways of, again, it was their way of pulling it. Pilots who had been fighter pilots were the only guys allowed to be FACs, putting in other fighter jet bombers. Pilots who had been instructor pilots, let's say on a C-130, a reciprocal or a recip aircraft with props, they were not allowed to put in airstrikes because they didn't know what a jet would do or how to work with the jet. So they put them in other roles of pilots. They would fly recon into Cambodia from Play Coup, let's say, in a black airplane with no light, and their whole job was just recon, but they wouldn't put in an airstrike. So different people had different assignments, and that in the way that their skills allowed them to participate as far as the Air Force was concerned. But we were just we were ground guys, and often when I said what I did or something, people kind of shook their head or looked at me funny because it doesn't compute. That sort of work isn't the sort of thing that a 30454 does. It wasn't in our job description. So, you kind of had to explain a little bit about what the Air Force did to us and what our job ended up really being, as opposed to your normal, you expect this job to be in an air-conditioned building and working with radio equipment and test equipment and repair work and all that bit. I never saw that stuff at all. I never touched that. So that was kind of a different experience in my lifestyle or my job, at any rate, where I was.
Okay. Did you volunteer to go up on these flights?
Oh yeah, it was fun. often volunteered. Sometimes they needed help. When I first started out, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, sometimes it's who you know, not what you know. When I was in casual control, just waiting for a group of guys to show up we were at the 19th task. We were in a transit billet, and they were just kind of waiting for a group of guys to show up to be able to kind of send us all out at one time to different locations. There was a map with some photographs of these FOLs in our AO, our area of operation. So I had already seen a small picture. They just had a picture of the runway, basically, and a piece of yarn from that picture to that location on the map. So I knew where these places were. I knew their names and all that. But I'd never gone anywhere just yet. I was kind of just sitting there ignorant. You can kind of see a little bit, but you really don't know what's there. And again, these were all Army units, the 1st Infantry Division and various others. So one of the first things that I did in casual control, at Viennois, we had a swimming pool. It was posh. It was like a summer camp. And one of the nasty jobs I guess the guys had in the flight line was washing airplanes. So what I ended up doing that was fun to me. I went down to the flight line and I'm hanging around the crew chiefs asking if there's something I can do, and they said, yeah, grab a sponge and a bucket and go over there and wash the plane down. So I was doing that, and as the planes were there for their certain amount of hours, like 100 hours, getting maintenance and that sort of thing, checking them out, making sure the engine's okay, or repairing them for some reason, pilots then would take them up and check them out after everything's been fixed. And one of the pilots was Colonel Pinkerton, and he was the air liaison officer with the 1st Infantry Division at Lai Khe, which is about 60 kilometers north of Viennois. And Colonel Pinkerton got a hold of me one day, or I was assigned to him to go up, and I'd sit in the back seat with a checklist, and he was pretty familiar with it already. But as we would fly the airplane, he'd be checking the brakes and the lights and this, that, and the other thing, and just making sure everything was working okay before it was sent back to the field, out in the field. So Colonel Pinkerton got to know me a bit, and he got to be requesting me to go with him. So we got to know each other, then he's asking me what was my plan, and I said, I don't know, I'm just waiting to, kind of have somebody tell me where to go or what to do. And he said he thought I would be a good candidate to go up to Lai Khe to work with the 1st Infantry Division. I said, that's fine with me, sir. So come the day that a bunch of us guys, I don't know, there's maybe 8 or 10 of us, brought us into a big room and asked us to stand in a circle, and they went around the circle asking, all right, where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And so we would identify which FOL we wanted to be assigned to. And so when it came my turn, I said, Colonel Pinkerton wants me at Lai Khe. And that trumped some other people who wanted to go there, so they put me at Lai Khe. The problem was, I didn't realize that at Lai Khe there was the division headquarters, which is where Colonel Pinkerton hung out, and that's where they did have some radio repair guys in a shop. And they also had the 3rd Brigade, the headquarter company of the brigade, and that's where they were just doing flying and working in the attack, the TOC, doing tactical operations. And the guys in the 3rd Brigade heard I was coming up. They had a guy leaving, and unbeknownst to anybody else, they just swapped me for their guy and didn't tell me where I was supposed to go. They didn't take me down the road to the appropriate place. They took me to their hooch. And so they kidnapped me, and I didn't realize it. Nor did division understand what happened. Like, where did he go? So that's how I ended up at the Lai Khe, but I ended up with the 3rd Brigade, not with the division headquarters office. So that made a big difference in my life as well.
Okay, for the better or worse, you think?
Well, that's a good and bad question. It was better in some ways because I didn't have to get stuck in a shop, which I really didn't like. But I didn't get to work on radios either, so was another problem. But I got to do just about everything else in the world that you had to do, plus get shot at and be in harm's way quite a bit. So I got to do a bunch of stuff that normally I wouldn't have done had I been a division. And I don't begrudge that at all. It was just kind of part of life, and I took it as it came. But when I got there, we still had lots of the T-68 offensive still going on in the rural areas, and we were getting hit all the time. And also, Lai Khe was a village originally, and they had established a base camp perimeter around the village with a highway going right through the whole thing. So Vietnamese were coming and going all the time. There was basically no security. The village chief wouldn't pay taxes to the VC, so the VC would shoot at his hooch a lot of times. And the sad part was, or the unfortunate, was that a lot of times the VC were to the northwest, which meant that when they shot at the village chief's hooch with whatever they used, our hooch was often in the line of fire behind the village chief. So once in a while we took rounds through our building. So we ended up going over and eventually we went to the village chief and said, we appreciate you not paying taxes, but this is getting dangerous for us. And so we helped him move, we helped him build a new hooch that got us out of the line of fire. So we helped him move to a nice place. We helped build it to his specifications. And so he got a really nice house out of the deal. And we stopped having small arms fire coming through our hooch once in a while. Wow. Little things like that happened that didn't happen down in the division place. They would have never known about it.
Now, did you ever get rocketed or mortared in your location?
Word is yes, yes, and yes. We had a bunker that was very deep under, with lots of PSP and railroad ties and heavy-duty stuff on top. And in the hooch, we had a walkway going down to the center of the hooch with little areas off to the side that were our sleeping areas, which we kind of built up ourselves. And I think there was 6 guys on one side, 6 on the other. We had about 12 people in our unit. At the end of the hooch was a hole in the ground, which you had to step over, and that was the entrance into the bunker. On the first rocket attack, we all beat him out and got down to the bunker. And we had lights on down there, or we had lights that we brought with us with no electricity. And I noticed on the walls that there are all these marks, like 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, and then there's a slash mark for number 5 through them. So I was asking the guys, which ones were, what was what, and how many where did this all come from? And they said those were the number of, rocket attack. And I said, so each one of these lines is an attack, all by itself. He said, or I said, each one of these is a rocket or a hit. And they said, no, each one of those is an attack, a separate attack, meaning that you had anywhere from 50 to 75, 100 rockets and mortars at a time for a period of time, like 15 minutes or an hour. And, well, not very long, because I didn't stay there that long, but it was 15 minutes, 45 minutes maybe. And they just put down a mark for that particular time period. And you had anywhere from 25, 50 to 100 and some rockets and mortars coming in at that time. So when I looked at the numbers that were etched on the wall, and there were a lot, I started getting a serious feeling as to what this was all about. And this was after the offensive was over by a month. But we were still taking a lot of fire out in the rural areas. So we got a lot of rockets, Russian 122 millimeter rockets, a lot of mortars, sometimes ground fire, especially at the village chief. We also had sappers come into the base camp and put satchel charges underneath the choppers, or in the choppers. things like that. Buildings often were blown up. So at any hour of the day or night, you just never knew. So we had constant you're on constant alert as to what was going on and how to react to it and where to go and that sort of thing. So it was kind of you're on your toes at all times.
Okay. Now that activity was mostly Viet Cong or North Vietnamese Army?
Predominantly VC. The NBA was not around our area because we had too many troops in the region to engage. They were around our area of operation because they were coming in from Cambodia from the Ho Chi Minh Trail. But usually the stuff that was going on in and around our base camp was predominantly VC.
Okay.
And they'd have a certain amount of material, they'd fire it off. Everybody here in our base camp hunkers down, and then as soon as it's done, then they send up gunships, and because we had gunship Squadron, we had Huey, Slicks, we had all sorts of stuff there for the division, as well as our FACs with our O1Es. And so as soon as things were over, then we're putting people in the air trying to locate where the firing came from. Often, and it's because it's VC, often they're already gone because they set up tubes or something and they fire it off and they just split. And a lot of this stuff was jerry-rigged so that they could lose it. They didn't have to carry it with them. All they did is bring a bunch of stuff in, fire it off, and they just left. And so they were gone often before sometimes even the firing took place because they would have it on an automatic situation. Batteries and things like this would fire off, and there wouldn't be a person nearby. So, and also the rockets would have a range of about 11 miles. So they could be way in the Michelin rubber plantation firing those things up. Again, nobody'd be around them when the firing took place, and they would just set it up at a general angle, and God knows where the things had hit. So, a lot of times it was VC just because they had the ability to get in and get around the area and also get into base camp and be gone. And there was no major engagement. It was just individual people, small amounts of people doing this to us.
Okay. And it sounds like that happened on a fairly regular basis.
Quite a bit. I was there, it happened a lot, and we had different time periods. Like we had, I think there was something called like the second Tet Offensive that was in around Easter, I believe it was, in '68.
Yeah.
And at this time, I remember there was a bunch of guys, it was lunchtime, and VC put mortars into the chow hall, and we got a bunch of guys hit. So at that point, then they stopped putting, the Army guys said, we're going to start serving lunch at different hours and different people showing up, so we're not going to have too many people standing around being potential targets or get hurt should a rocket come in or a mortar. So there were different surges of attacks or, getting hit. I did that for 7 months. And in September of '68, 40 years ago right now, September the 13th, Friday the 13th, the commanding officer, Major General Keith Ware, was in his CNC and was trying to help troops get away from an NVA regiment that they were walking into a trap. And I was on radios ready to call up TAC Air in case we had troops in contact. And his chopper was flying evidently pretty low, and they got hit by an RPG from the ground. And everybody on board died. It was basically shot out, and they crashed and burned, and all aboard were lost. And when that, and as well as, and I'm not even sure what all was going on, but I didn't think the war was appropriate. I thought it was a big waste. Watching with the material, looking at what I saw, where I was, what I got to do, going to Bien Hoa, Vung Tau, just flying around, just seeing and hearing stuff. It was not something I thought was appropriate. It was the wrong time, wrong place, wrong people, wrong everything. Mm-hmm. And when Major General Ware was killed, and I knew who he was, and I also felt somewhat responsible, emotionally at least, that he died on my watch, and that's not supposed to happen. That bothered me. So for years later, every time I would look for a whole year ahead, I would look at calendar and find Friday the 13th, and I would hide. I would just get away from people. I didn't do drugs, didn't do drinking very much after Vietnam, but I would hide on Friday the 13th. It just bothered me, and I recently got that resolved. But I requested a transfer after General Ware was killed. And I got a transfer approved, and they sent me to the 22nd TAF, which was out of Kenta, Ben Tui Air Base. Okay. And my area where I lived was in the western coast, a fishing village called Rakhia, Rachgia. And so we had Advisory Team 55 in Rakhia. And that's where we had a talk there as well. But the Air Force planes were kept at Ben Tui. And the pilots had to fly to a long strip, as we called it, outside of Rakhia at a little village called Rak Soi. And it was about 8 kilometers away. And I had to drive in a Jeep by myself, with the battle plans, the overlays, with the frequencies, the call signs, the day's operations. I took that map with me to Roksoi and then would give it to the pilot who would fly in. And then either I came on back into the town, or sometimes I stayed out at the airport, so to speak. It wasn't a port. It was a hollow shell of a building. It used to be an airport. And I would stay out there with my radio Jeep at times, all by myself. So supposedly it was secure. ET were everywhere. So it's just kind of by the grace of God I'm still here, because there's a lot of things that kind of passed me by that didn't take me out. And I got sniped at a few times on the road. We're traveling early morning, dawn, dark, dusky time, in the evening, coming back. And we're just driving on this road just like we owned it, and we didn't. And so that was an experience that also set me up for some things later on that I really didn't appreciate what the Air Force did to do that to us. We had an Army unit in Rakhia who had O-1Es also painted green. Ours were gray. And there was a small airport or airstrip in the village, but the Air Force said that the rocks on that strip, or the ground, just whatever the cover is on that strip, that was too big for the Air Force sizing. So the pebbles or gravel, whatever that was, the Air Force didn't want to land their planes on it, let the Army do it, but we weren't. So that meant we had to go out that 8 kilometers, do that kind of a formerly commercial, and it is today a commercial airport. So we landed out there on their tarmac, which was a real nice airport, but it set me up for having to drive those 8 kilometers, and that set me up for some serious issues.
Did you carry a weapon with you?
I carried many weapons with me. I had my M16, especially when I was in Rakhia. That's where I really carried a lot. I had an M16, I had a 38 on my hip, I had a 45 shoulder holster, I had a 12-gauge shotgun laying on the transom of on the tranny or the stick shift. I had frag grenades, I had smoke grenades, I had concussion grenades, and I had incendiary grenades sitting on my radios in case, supposedly, we're supposed to pull the incendiary grenades should we ever get in a get hit by VC, so that we deny the enemy the radios and the frequencies and stuff. Of course, take care of your equipment before you take care of yourself is the motto. So, I carried a lot of weapons and a lot of ammo, and I constantly thought, I don't have enough. There's going to be more of them, one more of them than more of me. And so I constantly had this thought, it's secure to have a lot of weapons with you, but I always thought, you know what, I bet you $1 there's going to be somebody I won't see or something I'm not catching, and that's what's going to do me in. And it never happened that way, but that was my constant fear and thought. And so I kind of lived with that for about 5 months.
Now, did you normally travel alone, or did you have someone with you?
Normally traveled alone. Sometimes they would fly an extra pilot in to the Roxoy strip, and I would go on out and pick them up and then bring them into Rockjaw. The person would stay, they would swap pilots, so the guy in Rockjaw would then go on out and take the airplane, and he'd fly back to Bentui, and the guy who flew in would stay with us for a few days. So the pilots would switch once in a while, which made we had to go on out and pick them up also. And that was beyond the operations, TAC air stuff. So that was just, administrative or, just coming in and going out, just swapping people so they didn't have to stay at Rockjaw for too long. They had air-conditioned billets at Bentui. They didn't at Rockjaw. It was an old temple, Buddhist temple that had been converted to like a BOQ. And so the guys had, cots in a little space for them to sleep in and little personal area. So our pilots just kind of had this little space that they would switch people. And, we always had a pilot there usually, but they were there for a few days, and they'd go back to Bentui, and they'd come back again. So he worked with 2 or 3 pilots who would rotate in and out of Rockjaw, but we had to go get them. And that was beyond taking the overlays out in the mornings or picking them up in the evenings or things like that. That was for operations, TAC air stuff.
Now, how did everybody get along? I mean, officer, enlisted, etc.
But when I was at Bentui, which was Air Force, that was pretty much officer enlisted were separated. And yet they had a chow hall where everybody ate together. They may have had a certain area that the officers, went to and the EM went to, but basically we were in the same open space to eat. At Rockjaw, as I remember it, we were all together. Now we might have had to salute or something like that, I think, but I don't remember that much of that. It was pretty informal. We were in uniform, but we just we didn't have much in the way of military protocol as I remember it going on. And we had where the BOQ was, we also had this officer enlisted, party hooch. And so we had movies on this great big, it was like a plywood that had been attached to these 4x4s put in the ground and painted white on the plywood, and that was our movie screen. And we brought out tables, we had a canopy, we had this bar in a building with screening around it for ventilation. And everybody was there. That was officers and enlisted alike. We didn't have many people. I don't think we might have had maybe 100 people or so in the whole advisory team. It wasn't many. A lot of them were Navy personnel, Brown River people. We had Army guys for sure. And then we had myself and another guy off in another E4 Air Force guy working there. So we could spell each other off on the radios and help each other out. Bob Kastner was the guy I worked with. He and I lived, as well as many other EM, we lived in the Camdo Hotel. It was just down the street, and it was a hotel, it still is. and we had a room that we shared, and so a lot of the Army and Air Force, we were billeted there in the hotel. I think we're on the second floor or something like this. And so in a way it was kind of a secure community, but we're right below Cambodia. And the VC used to either take boats or just walk through our province, the Kingshan province, and bring material and weapons and supplies and stuff down to Kamau, which is below us, south of us, and that was the tip of South Vietnam, the end of the Vietnamese Delta. And so there was people moving through us all the time. So a lot of times I suppose they let us alone because to cause us any problems, we would have caused them problems. So it's kind of like live and let live type of thing. And that happened in many ways. And so anyway, that's kind of the number of people and how we operated as officer and enlisted personnel anyway.
Okay. How was your food?
It was Army food. It was chow hall food, and I hated it. Reconstituted milk. There were two tastes in my mouth that I longed for. I would have died for, and it was something like McDonald's French fries or something like them, and real milk. And, I think to this day I still have kind of a penchant for those two flavors. It's not that I want to live my life on them, but those are two things that milk, it was just horrible. And the chow hall food was chow hall food. And when I was at Lai Khe, we had the party hooch, and we built an extension onto our hooch. And often it would be feast or famine, but often we'd get food from the commanding general's mess, or we'd scrounge it somehow. And we had a barbecue. We'd get chicken and we'd barbecue it, and we had parties, and we had a darn good time because we were staying there permanently, whereas the Army guys were pretty much transient. And they didn't have many solid buildings. A lot of their stuff, they lived in tents basically, and they had dirt for floors, and oftentimes. So a bunch of them had cement pads that the GP tents were put on, but a lot of times it wasn't. They were living like campouts. So we had this pretty nice hooch that we kept up, and we kept adding to it, and we kept having parties, and all sorts of people were showing up, and it was just kind of a central social place for so many people. And so we had some pretty fun parties and pretty good food. And when I was at Rockjaw, I just don't remember the food so much, but it was still chow hall type stuff. And I remember eating there, but I don't remember much about it. It was a very different experience. We didn't have too much local. Vietnamese were around us all the time. We were working and supporting the ARVN. And the province chief was a colonel, Colonel Van Tai. And I heard that all the province chiefs in the Delta were supposed to be civilians, and there wasn't supposed to be a military person in charge of the province for various reasons. And Colonel Van Tai was obviously a military guy and running the show, but he had a hard time getting out of bed with either his wife or his girlfriends. And we had all the military guys, all the ARVN, all these units ready for going out in the morning. And I had already driven out and dropped the overlays off, and I was back, and Van Tai still hadn't taken off yet. All these guys, tanks, troops, whole mess of things. Everybody was on the side of the road waiting for this colonel to show up so they could take off and go do their thing. So the war in the South, at least in my province, was very different than running around with the Army guys or Australians or something like this up north. At least in 3 Corps where I was originally. So it was a different world in 4 Corps, and we were just a few Americans, and there were the Vietnamese around us. but I didn't eat much Vietnamese food. A little bit. But at least I got to meet I met a lot of folks, and I had a good time with the culture and with the people, and that's where I started appreciating their issues a lot more, because we didn't have that experience in 3 Corps. I was mostly around American soldiers and didn't see that much of the village of Lai Khe. In the Delta, I was around the Vietnamese, and the Americans were the minorities.
Okay. Did you get to go on an R&R at all?
Yeah, I did. I was dating a Red Cross woman, a donut dolly up at Lai Khe, and she and I put in for R&R, but mine didn't come through. And when we both went in November, we met in Bangkok, and I could have taken 2 R&Rs, but I thought I'd get caught and cheated or busted or something, because when I went to the Delta, they were going to give me an R&R out of that 22nd task as well. But the 19th task, I got an R&R to Bangkok, and I think that was in November that we went. So we kind of just hung around and kind of did the tourist scene, went to the River Kwai, the bridge that was there, visited the King's Palace and things like that. So it was a short-lived thing, but it was interesting, and it was just touristy type stuff, and then I came back.
Now, the girl you were with you said she was a donut dolly. Was she with the Red Cross, or was she a nurse, or?
All the donut dollies are Red Cross personnel, and they are let's see what they call them. They were recreational specialists, so I think that was the title. And all the donut dollies, part of the Red Cross, they had to have a 4-year college degree before they could get into this program. And they served a year tour duty, and they had where we were, and they got on choppers and they went out to fire support bases and did games and brought out warm Kool-Aid with cookies to the flight line to us at times, and they had a little radio station that they would broadcast and have that we could listen to. So they were there with us and around us, and constantly, in the same hazardous zone that we were, except they didn't have a gun, or they didn't have flak jackets like we did, or wear helmets. So these women were subject to the same experiences that we did in many cases, and yet they were civilian. And sad to say that the Red Cross just dumped them when the women came back. There was no medical support, no emotional support for PTSD. The Red Cross didn't keep the records on them. They dumped them. And the women have had to band together and kind of just support each other. Kind of as an example, of the American women who died in Vietnam, there were 8 American women who were killed who were military. And their names are on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Because they're military. There were 60 American civilian women killed in Vietnam during the war, which was 11 years, from 64 to 75, as the government calls it. And their names are not on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, nor anywhere in a particular place as a group, because they're different women. Secretaries, there were missionaries, there were medical personnel who were civilians, there were the Red Cross women, the donut dollies. And so there's really no memorial to them. And the Women's Memorial in D.C. near the Vietnam Vet Memorial, or the Vietnam Memorial, that's kind of for the women, but it really is a military memorial. So the civilians are, kind of use it, but it's a little hard for them because they don't have their own. And so anyway, that was the issue with the donut dollies, and the difference between donut dollies and nurses, military personnel that were there in Vietnam stationed with us.
Okay. Just looking at your application, there was kind of a funny episode where you guys were trying to get Bob Hope to come and visit.
Yeah, that was Christmas, 1968. I was in Rockja, and somebody came up with the the idea that because Rock Johnson is nowhere, Podunk's little place, we're feeling kind of lonely and sad for ourselves. And so somebody came up with the idea, why don't we call Bob Hope and see if we could get him to come down? I mean, really pie in the sky idea. So this Lieutenant J.G. Navy guy, McGrath, gets appointed to do the phone call, and we're in the party hooch next to the BOQ. Now there's another little building right next to it, and there's an upstairs, and there's a telephone there that's the second telephone that's on the same line. So they told me I should go up to that other phone and listen in to verify that McGrath is not bullshitting us, that he does what he's saying he's doing. He's just not sitting on the phone making noises and talking, but not really talking to anybody in particular. So I was on the other phone listening in, and McGrath starts off, as you have to in Vietnam, you get to a switchboard and you ask for somebody. And the switchboard will patch you in, and usually it's an enlisted person who will be the switch operator. But there is an OIC, an officer in charge, or an NC OIC in that office, in that unit. And so in case something big comes up, that person usually will handle the issue. So McGrath takes on the name Admiral McGrath, and he starts out, and we have a Sergeant Green at our base at Rockjaw, who's in our switch. So Sergeant Green patches into wherever, like Canto or Bentui or somewhere, and the word starts coming out. This is Admiral McGrath, and he puts in a deep voice, and his friend Bob Hope, he's the one to find Bob Hope, and he'd sure appreciate if this young man who's on the switch would be able to find and help him out, connect him with Bob Hope. Well, the minute he's Admiral McGrath, the switch guy turns him over to his OIC, and you can hear the tone of voice change in the kid's voice as well, and yes sir, and all this, and then the officer would come on and, sir, what can I do you for, sir? And so this is Admiral McGrath, and so he plays this, and we keep going through various switches, and the officers are also doing secondary requests looking for Bob Hope, because the Admiral doesn't know where his friend is, so he's asking these people if they can find Bob Hope for him. So they've got him on hold a little bit, and there's always the switches up and down the line, because you're patched through these different switchboards. And to know whether the switch is finished, if they need to pull the plug on you, the operator comes on and says, "Are you working?" And so if you hear that and you want to remain connected, you say, "Working, working." So Admiral McGrath is constantly saying, "Working, working," all the time, because people are coming in various times, checking them out. Are you still on the line? Still using it? Are you still busy? So there's always that to maintain those connections. And once in a while you get pulled. So you have to kind of start again. You have to go through switch 1 to switch 2 to switch 3. And sometimes you go different switches. It just kind of depends on who's got a line open to what's the next town. So all these officers on the switches are also at the same time looking for where Bob Hope is. And he's not being found very easily. And it took a while, and we went through Saigon, we went to Long Binh, we went to Da Nang, we were at Cam Ranh Bay. We went to several places, and always, "Are you working? Are you working?" coming on. And so finally, I think we're at I think we ended up at Cam Ranh Bay, and all of a sudden the phone opens up, and there's obviously a civilian talking, because it says, "Yes, hello, may I help you? What's going on?" And McGrath says, "This is Admiral McGrath. I'm an old friend of Bob Hope's, and I'd sure like to talk with my old friend." He says, "Well, sure, I'm sorry, but Bob Hope's on stage right now." And this was one of the managers. And the next thing you heard was this big roar of laughter and applause, and we had arrived. We were behind Bob Hope. And all of a sudden, McGrath broke. And when he heard that laughter and he realized who he was talking to, the next thinking out of his mouth. He just gave himself up. He said, "Oh, really? I'm just Lieutenant McGrath. I'm down here in Rockjaw." He told him the whole sad story. And this poor guy was listening to this for a moment or two. And the next thing, he was a real pause. And you could hear it in his voice. He was so empathetic. He was sad. And he was real sad that he had to tell us that Bob Hope just was scheduled out so much that there was just no way that we could get down to that little tip of Vietnam. And so McGrath had, told his story. This guy was real sad and empathetic and sympathetic with him, but said, "Jesus, I'm just really sorry. There's just no way." And so McGrath said, "Well, I really appreciate you helping out and telling me what's going on, and we're just happy to talk with you guys, and Merry Christmas anyway." So McGrath hung up the phone. I hung up the phone. So I come downstairs, and all the guys have been listening, and so I tell them what I'm hearing, and McGrath is telling them too, and we just have a great old time talking about this thing and drinking and just getting lit up. And it's either the Christmas Eve or the night before, one or the other, but I think it was Christmas Eve. And so we all just have a good old time, and you can't come, but we had fun, didn't we? So we all do our thing, and everybody goes home that night. Early the next morning, Sergeant Green is on the phone to everybody, calling you up. Get your butts out of bed. Choppers are on their way, and they've got brass. And what had happened was Admiral McGrath had left some trails along the phone lines. And all of a sudden, there's a bunch of officers. I think the lowest officer was a colonel or a lieutenant colonel. And there were 3 choppers. And they were heading for Lai Khe. They were heading for Rockjaw. And they wanted to know where the hell this Admiral McGrath was, and where that call came from, and who set that up, and where is he? And Sergeant Green, to his credit, he should have gotten, obviously, a Bronze Star for this. He BS'd them, and he told them, sir, he was on Switch last night. There's no Admiral McGrath he ever heard of, and nobody, no, we're having a Christmas party, and he put them on. So then they came into the area, to our different locations around the city, and everybody was scarce. We all ran away. We had places to go, things to do, people to see, and it had nothing to do with being around for those officers to ask any of us questions. So everybody was gone. It was a scarce environment around there as far as military personnel goes. So whoever was around kind of, put them off or didn't know enough to say anything, and so they kind of hummed and hawed for a while, a couple, 3 hours evidently, and then they went back to their choppers and went back home. They never found out about who and where this Admiral McGrath came from. And evidently they didn't know that there was a Lieutenant J.G. McGrath there in our base, but somehow maybe they were Army guys or something, but they didn't know about the Navy people, which was, again, good for us. A lot of times that inter-service rivalries, one side doesn't know what the other side does or how they operate. We got our Christmas call through. We almost got busted, but Sergeant Green saved us. And so we almost got to see Bob Hope, but not that close.
Okay. Any other humorous stories or events that happened?
A couple. This is kind of indicative of what veterans and soldiers, what we had. When I was at Lai Khe, we're driving down the road, it's Highway 13 that we were on, and as we're driving by some of these pits that have the 105 and 155 howitzers, those guys were hanging out and firing off rounds, and the driver, whoever was driving our Jeep, one of the rounds went off unexpectedly and scared the poop out of the guy. He jerks the wheel, and we ended up in a ditch, basically. He pulled off the road, and some of the guys in one of those pits saw us do that, and they started laughing at it. He was kind of telling his buddies, look over there, a bunch of Air Force dudes or whatever they are. They're so scared of this big gun, just the noises, and these guys are all used to that stuff. And so I'm kind of standing around because we had to get this Jeep out of the ditch, and it was kind of in the muck. And as we're around there, hanging out, trying to figure out what to do, or somebody's taking care of the problem. There was some small arms fire that went off, and we're kind of out on the perimeter. So I don't know whether it was incoming or outgoing at the time, but it was small arms, and either it was M16 or AK. And the next thing you know, these guys in the howitzer, they jumped off their bunkers and got off the gun real quick, and they started heading for some hole or someplace. And we're all standing there laughing at them, because we're all used to the small arms fire. We don't care about that. We know what that means. But it just kind of showed me, or it was kind of funny to watch how, these guys were used to the big noises. They didn't like small arms fire. We were used to small arms fire, but we were scared of the big noises. Or at least it surprised us enough that, it shocked us up. So it was kind of an interesting experience to see that. There was, I don't know. There was something else in my head here a minute ago. There were some difficult things that happened as well, but so I don't know. It was a mixture of stuff.
Okay. I notice here at Rakia, you received the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with Bronze Star for Valor.
Right.
Do you want to talk about that? How you received that?
Yeah. This was given to us by Colonel Van Ty, and what the Arvins were doing was making up events and just dreaming them up and giving various advisory team members different medals and awards for doing something that never happened. And we called these Morrell Metals because they weren't true, that nothing happened. And basically it helped the Arvins show to their superiors that, yeah, there is action going on down here, and they're taking care of it, and everything's hunky-dory, and we're killing the enemy. And they give us the medal, and it makes them look good, and it makes us look good because we have these medals, which are, high esteemed medals. So we were getting Bronze Stars, and we're getting Cross of Gallantries and stuff like this. And so we had this one award ceremony, and I knew what was coming. So I pretended that I was sick, and I told Kastner to go in my place and get my Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, because I didn't want to receive it. I didn't believe in this. So I was pretty peeled with the whole war anyway. And so Kastner went, and he came back and he told me that the officers were pretty upset that I didn't show up, even though I said I was sick. And he told me he took his medal, and I think he got the same thing or something similar. And he took his down to the Rockjaw Canal and threw it in and almost got court-martialed. Somebody got real upset seeing him throw his medal away. And so they got upset with him. So I kept my medal, mainly in my mind at that time, I was thinking I'd keep it just because it's a memory or a token of how crazy that war was, and how I don't know, how stupid it was, just how much was going on, and here you have something that's a valuable idea, that the award is valuable in itself, but it was given for nothing. The event did not happen. I got the original orders for all of us, and it's like 3 pages, front and back, and I can't verify that none of those events happened because I wasn't around to all these places, but I know 50% didn't happen at any rate because I know where we were, and I know who the people were, and they didn't do those things. They weren't in those environments, and they weren't in those locations at those dates where they said they were, and I know they didn't kill people. So, it's just part of the falseness of that war, just another part of it. And there are many examples like that I witnessed, which again just kind of jaded me, not only against the war, but any war, and specifically that one, and who had started it, and why, and how we were carrying it on. And having been back in Vietnam Vietnam since, and living there and being around people and doing some study and the now in years since, it kind of validates my position, I believe. So.
Now, when did you finally leave Vietnam?
I left in March of 1969. I don't remember what day it was, but I remember being at Tan Son Nhut. I left Rock Cha, went to, well, I ended up in Tan Son Nhut at any rate. That's where I flew out of. I remember running into Moldy. Moldy was one of our crew chiefs up at Lai Khe, and he had been transferred down there to Tan Son Nhut to work on some of the airplanes down there. So I ran into him on the flight line. So we went and had a beer and chewed the fat for a little bit, and then I grabbed my Freedom Bird and I headed back to the world.
And what was it like arriving back home? You got back, let's see, that was in 69.
Right,
March of 69. Did you run into any war protesters or anything at the airport, or any incidents like that?
No, because they flew us in. We arrived at Travis late at night. So we then were dispersed. And I don't remember too much about it, except I knew there's a lot of Army guys. Some were getting out of the Army the minute they hit stateside. Others were going other places. I still had 9 months left in my enlistment in the Air Force, and I had been reassigned back to the 5th Mob, which kind of burned me because I was asking for some other assignment, and it's like the Air Force screwed up my records or orders and stuff, so I was not a real happy camper. So my situation was I went from Travis, I took a civilian bus down to San Francisco International. I had a red-eye flight to Albany Airport, which I then arrived in the morning in my 1505, the summer weight Air Force uniform. And they didn't allow us to fly in our jungle bunny or jungle fatigue. So I had to fly in my good uniform.
Yeah, Class A.
Yeah, Class A summer weight. And so I arrived in March in Albany, and as I remember it, there's a lot of snow on the ground in Albany Airport in March of 1969. So my dad came from Johnstown and picked me up at the airport and then drove me back to Johnstown. I had, I think, about, a week and a half or 2 weeks before I had to show up at Robins Air Force Base. And I bought a VW Super Beetle and drove it down to Robins. And so I didn't have any encounters with anybody in particular protesting-wise, but the guy who I tried to buy the VW from was a pain in the butt, and I have a feeling it was something to do with my Vietnam experience because he wouldn't help me out. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't deal with me. And I almost gave cash to somebody else on the floor to say, have this car ready for me in 2 days. This other idiot's not working with me for some reason. He's putting me off. And so, I think looking back on it now, my mom was with me, and this guy was just really rude. And so I have a feeling it had something to do with the experience, but, I was kind of in a fog. So, I didn't see anybody until I was down in Georgia, and I saw some protesting going on down there, and then I also got out and I saw protesting up in Albany State and shutting down the thruway and kind of messing up the library there, which kind of bummed me out because I was trying to get some studying done. But I didn't have anything on the way back in.
Okay. So you went back to the 5th Mob. Did you run into anyone that you had known in Vietnam or from your stateside duty or anything?
I have never seen anybody but one person from Vietnam that I knew.
Okay.
Unlike my dad's stuff in World War II, they used to have annual reunions And one time in, I guess it's 74, I was in Johnstown, and Dad said, let's go on over to, we're going to go to this lunch place. And there's 4, 5, 6 guys that showed up, and they were his World War II buddies that popped in for having lunch with him. I have never seen anybody except one guy, and he was one of the pilots I flew with in Vietnam at Lai Khe. He was an Australian, and he lives in Canberra. And Mac, I ran into him in '87 when I was in Australia to photograph the first Welcome Home parade for the Australian vets in Sydney. And Mac was around, and I went on over to his base and saw him. But he's the only person I've ever run into from Vietnam that I knew, I worked with, or anything about him. So for myself, I've never had any contact with anybody from Vietnam that I knew or had very much to do with over there. And when I was in the 5th Mob, there were a few guys who were still there who I knew before I left, but most of them were new. And so that was, again, a new group of people, basically.
Okay. All right. And then you stayed there for the next 9 months until you were discharged?
Yeah, and I saw the handwriting on the wall. I was real angry with the Air Force. I was angry, period, because of the war. And even though I had a critical career field and they were going to give me a lot of money as far as in those days, if I re-enlisted, I decided not to re-enlist, and I applied back at Fulton Montgomery Community College in Johnstown and got accepted. And so I got an early out because my discharge would have been in February of 1970. And as it turned out, I got a discharge in December the 5th of 1969. So they gave me a 3-month drop. And that was because I had proof that I was accepted to a college, and they knew I wasn't going to re-enlist, so they cut us out a little bit early and saved their budget. So I got out of, on Friday afternoon, on December the 5th, I think it was, I walked off base out of Robin, and I was out of the Air Force, and all of a sudden I didn't have anybody to relate to, and I was a civilian, and so there it started from there.
Okay. And did you have any trouble adjusting to civilian life at all after your military experiences?
Well, in a way, I did. The military gave me, ways in like how to take care of yourself and live and eat and sleep and keep the place clean and that sort of thing. And I have either my parents or however, so I could do that. The problem I had was emotional and PTSD type related stuff. Being pretty angry, being isolated, not having anybody to talk to about stuff. And what I ended up doing in Macon was I used to hang around the Centenary Baptist Church, and the kids there were from Wesleyan University, a women's college, and Mercer University, and a couple of other kids, local civilian kids. And I had some friends in that group, and they were still there that had been there before I left for Vietnam. And so what I would do is I would tell one or two, or I told 2 or 3 people, I would tell them different things, but I wouldn't tell any one person too much. And I would tell some people I could trust a little bit stronger stuff. Other people, I'd tell them a little bit less stuff, less strong. And that way I was kind of letting things out. But I really didn't have anybody to talk to. And nobody knew what I was talking about. And it was just my way of kind of unloading a little bit of this stuff at the start. And from then on, though, I was always older than the college kids that I was around. I always felt different. I was isolated socially, intellectually. intellectually, I just didn't fit in. And when I was around other vets, it was the sort of thing I realized pretty early on that anybody who had come out of Vietnam, we basically had three questions. I think we asked each other, when were you there, who were you with, and what you do? And since so many of us had been there at different times, doing different jobs in different locations, we generally didn't have much to work with that was in common. And so we kind of went away from each other. And some guys, pulled together and had some different organizations like VBA and things like that, perhaps, as a result of not being accepted in the DAV and VFW and American Legion at first. They won their war. We lost ours. And I had personal experiences where I was told to get the hell out of their bar or out of their building because they didn't want me around or didn't want our group around there. When their membership started dying off, then they started saying, oh, hey, we need some help. So why don't you guys show up here and be part of our group? But it was kind of an isolating social experience I believe, for the Vietnam vets. Especially when we went over individually and we came back individually. There was no unit cohesion. There was no reintegration into our society at large, let alone our small community. Not as an individual, it wasn't. Our families took care of us as much as they could, but again, they did what they could for us, but they didn't know what had happened, and it was difficult for us to talk about it, which is exactly what's going on today. And so I and a lot of others just more or less muddled through, kind of in a fog for some period of time, probably for me about 9 years. Until things started to settle out, I started to at least have names and issues to address. But I was just more or less kind of bopping along. I functioned somewhat, but I don't even know what I was like to other people in their eyes. I don't think I was too well put together. I had too many real strange experiences, and I was too hyper, and I was constantly moving and on alert, and it was kind of like I took the military with me in many ways, to operate, to live, to, the way I felt, the way I thought, the way I lived. So I had guns with me for a long time. So I had a lot of residuals from the war, being hyper alert, stuff that we now know is PTSD related in many ways. So it was kind of difficult for a while.
Okay. I think you kind of touched on it, but how do you think your experience changed or affected your life? I mean, once probably after that 10 or 11 year period.
Well, for one thing, because my parents, my father was an Army major in the active reserves, and he was inactive and retired. Mom was a teacher. He was a teacher. So I had an educational / military background, so to speak, in my family. And I think that was encouraging and supporting that I should, get what I could in the way of education, and I knew that as well. So I was aiming for, and eventually got in 1977 out of the University of Northern Colorado a bachelor's degree in secondary education, teaching certificate in biology and earth science. So I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to know things, and pretty soon, when I said know things, that came because in the early 80s, if a teacher wanted to have a class talk about the war in Vietnam, there was very little, if any, information about the war. Textbooks really weren't talking about it very much. So I ended up giving slideshows from the photographs that I made at Lai Khe and Rock Cha. And I would show and talk about my experience as a vet and my time there. And then I started being interested in, how did other people deal with it? And the more I was working with veteran affairs and helping out here and there, learn more. And so I guess for my own sake, perhaps, trying to learn and understand what happened to me, started delving into what is this all about, and what was going on, and why, and how did it start, and what happened to us, and what's happened since. And over the years, people have written books. There's been the movies, all kinds of things have come out and developed over the years. And as time goes on, I pick up more information.
Okay. Have you read a lot on Vietnam since you've gotten out? Have you watched the movies about Vietnam?
Yes, and I watch them usually like Platoon and Full Metal Jacket and those types of featured films. I go to those twice, once for myself to kind of get out whatever emotions were going to get triggered, and I'd go to them a second time to critically evaluate them as to how could these be used in educational settings. Platoon is an R-rated movie, so I think Full Metal Jacket. School districts often will not allow an R-rated video movie to be shown in the class, so my idea was to help teachers figure out what parts of the movie were relevant, helpful, and maybe to take a section out for an example of a certain type of thing. So I went to them for that purpose, and then I would write up, activities for classes and talk to workshops and conferences for educators, mostly social studies, how to use these various materials, media, TV stuff as well. And so I've been part of, helping set up one of the first out of 6 cities. We had the DAV set up a pilot program in '79 based on their support of John Wilson's PhD work called the Forgotten Warrior Project. And we set up what was called the Vietnam Veteran Outreach Program. And in Denver, I was the first veteran service advocate with the DAV at the department, the state level. And I was running the desk and bringing intakes and getting them into counseling with Jim Goodwin and Tom Williams, who wrote the first 2 books on dealing with PTSD. And that was just after PTSD had been given a name in the DSM-3 in 1980. So we were doing the preliminary work, which established itself in the VA, and they called it the vet centers. So we helped train the vet centers when they opened up, told them what it was like to do the job that we're doing. So again, it was being part of and learning, and partly for my benefit. I get something out of it. I'm trying to get help healing. Sad to say that the DAV put us on the line, but never took care of us because I had stuff going on that they could care less about. It was do the job, suck it up, and do your thing. And unfortunately, that wasn't a real good business model. I've been reading stuff. I've been reading many of the books, academic as well as trade materials, like Phil Caputo's book, Rumor of War, Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. And I've used that information, again, in what I've then developed to classes, guest lectures, presentations at national conferences. And then that brought me into wanting to photograph the parades, memorials, monuments here in the United States that the veterans had developed in their communities. And then I ended up going back to Vietnam in 1989 in February. And I've been living part-time and living in Saigon and Hanoi since then. And I've been in Australia and South Korea, our major allies in the war, to do the same thing. Photograph what happened to the veterans, and how do we tell the story to our children? The educational materials and methods that each country uses to tell the students about the war. And it's very different, as you can imagine. So that's been kind of something I just took a bite out of, and I started chewing, and I've been chewing ever since.
Going back to Vietnam, Did you visit any of the exact areas where you were stationed at all?
I did. Our trip started off, we left Bangkok at that time because there was no U.S.-Vietnamese direct relationship. So we had to work through the Vietnamese mission in New York City, and then we got our passport and we got our visas out of Bangkok at the Vietnamese embassy there. We went to Hanoi, first of all, which none of us had ever been to. So we spent a few days, it was a 2-week trip, I think, 2.5 weeks. We spent a few days in Hanoi, then we went to Hue and Da Nang. We flew into Da Nang and went to Hue, and then we went down to Saigon and went to Trang Bang, which is a little to the west, and that's where one of the veterans, 2 veterans that were with me, and we had a TV crew and a Vietnamese woman looking for her 2 little daughters. One of the guys had been hurt by a command-detonated booby trap, an IED as it's called today. So we went back to the site where he was wounded, and people there remembered it, and we had the TV crew filming that. And he gives his Purple Heart to our Vietnamese guide. We went back to my base camp at Lai Khe and roamed around a little bit, found an unexploded mortar round that had surfaced in the laterite soil. I almost kicked it as we were walking through the same area where my hooch used to stand, but it was just wood and materials, and all that had been taken away by the locals after the war. So I have photographs of my base camp in 1968, 1989, and then I've been back off and on right up through 2006 when I rephotographed it for the last time, and that was a real cathartic experience for me at that point, which it kind of, I let go of a lot of the pain that I had up to that point in time. So,
was there any evidence at all that your unit was even there? I mean, or was it totally obliterated?
Well, it's not obliterated. The area that we were located on was still a rubber plantation. And before the war, the Vietnam Rubber Institute had occupied what we used as our admin building. That was their laboratory. And it was built by the French in 1941. And so the institute, the Rubber Institute, had gone up to Da Nang area somewhere and had a little cubbyhole up there during the war. And after the war, Lai Khe had been pretty heavily hit, and then the NVA, or the Vietnamese government, took it over. The military, occupied it for a while. The admin building was rebuilt. I guess they tore the old one down, but they built it exactly as the old one had been. But they had a new roof, which was a modern roof. The old one had kind of a ventilating system from the 40s, and they have air-conditioned rooms in a couple places, like where my radio room was at one point. It's air-conditioned. It's I think an accountant is in there, a bean counter or somebody. So the building is basically the same, and I was standing in it. I was. A lot of emotions were coming over me. And there are a bunch of cement pads that hooches were on that are part of the Army guys, and that was towards where the division headquarters was located. But where the brigade is, it's a very peaceful, beautiful environment because the Rubber Tree Institute doesn't believe in cutting down trees. And so they have various signs up around. And they keep the area, the grass and the area very well cared for. It's like a park. And there are birds chirping, the trees are real tall, the scars are pretty much grown over in the trees that have been hit. And yet there are areas that I remember very vividly, and I know where I'm standing in some of those regions based on the old photographs plus just my memory. And so it's an interesting thing. The airstrip is pretty much just been let go, and it's just kind of breaking up little bit by little bit. It's kind of like tarmac material like asphalt, just kind of crumbling. There's a secondary school, grades 8 through 12, which is situated right where our airplanes used to sit in the revetments at the base of the airstrip, where there are Air Force airplanes, the O-1s. And just off a little bit to the side of that, where one of the chopper assault squadrons was located, there is a brand new elementary school. And that school was built by the Friends of Children of Vietnam, and that is Terry Anderson's group. And Terry Anderson was a Marine in Vietnam, and he was the AP bureau chief in Tehran when they got captured. Back when Jimmy Carter, this is the group that got caught, and 444 days they were captured in Iran. So when Anderson got out, this is one of the things that he did. He organized this group, and their job is their mandate, they're trying to build an elementary school in every province of Vietnam. And once they get one done in every province, they're going to go back and do a second one. So that was Terry Anderson's group that built that school. And so I got to see that, and so the area is pretty much the same as it's always been. Lai Khe is not a real burgeoning place at all. It's pretty like laid back. But they do have the two schools on the airstrip, and it's a very quiet, peaceful place.
Okay. Now, how did you get involved with actually living there?
Well, when I went back to visit, it's the sort of thing where you get a visa for tourism, or you can get one if you're going to be a business person. And I just kind of stuck it out a while, and so I'd be there for a month, and then it's 2 months, and then 3 months, and I got an apartment, and then I ended up that's when I started looking around at the different countries. So I ended up coming back to the States. I would end up in the Denver area substitute teaching for a while, and I'd make a little bit of money, and then I could afford an airplane ticket, go back to Vietnam, or go to Australia, or go to Korea, substitute teach, do a guest lecture to kind of live off the land, so to speak, through people who helped me out. Like in Australia, I had a mother-in-law's apartment that they didn't charge me for. I could just stay there for the few weeks that I was there. So the expenses were pretty minimal, but I didn't own anything, and everything was kept in storage here in the Denver area, climate-controlled storage, all my photographs and all my personal belongings. So when I was mainly in Vietnam, especially in Hanoi, I would substitute at the United Nations International School in Hanoi. We teach in English, as all United Nations schools do. And these are schools for the diplomat children and business people. Normally they're in the capital cities throughout the world. And when I went to apply for a sub job, the principal asked me, have you ever taught before? And do you speak English? And can you handle a class without either killing the kids or the kids getting away with murder? And so I told him I taught middle school and high school and college, so that seemed to take care of his needs. So I was, as I would substitute in different classes, science, social studies, English, just like a normal sub here in the States would do, I'd be making $100 a day, tax-free. When I was in Korea, I was a visiting professor at a university for a year. So I made college prop salary, and I had a subsidized apartment. And so again, I kind of cobbled these educational jobs along with what I could do, and I'd go out and keep on photographing and asking questions relative to the war from the veteran's perspective. And in 1999, when I was teaching at UNIS, Hanoi, the social studies teacher was taking off for 3 weeks, and their teachers don't get sick from stress like American teachers do. China, something like this, Thailand, but they don't get sick. And there's not the sort of stress we have here in America, not at all, nothing like our educational system. And so I had to teach his course, and he wanted to know if I knew anything about the war in Vietnam. And I said, yeah, I know a little bit about it. And so I was the first American war veteran to teach about the Vietnam War, as he wanted to call it, to high school students, international high school students in Vietnam. So there's American profs over there with college students, but there has been no American veteran teaching about the war to international students at the secondary level in Vietnam, like I did back in 1999. So that was kind of neat and unique. Mm-hmm. So that's what I've been doing ever since, and that's just kind of the way, again, making the money and being able to stay there for a while and traveling around and helping out, doing workshops here in the States, and again, just sharing the information as it becomes known, because new stuff comes up all the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to include in the interview?
Well, when you and I met a few weeks ago, back in August, one thing I think would be helpful to reiterate for this taping. One thing I strongly feel is that as an American war veteran, between the United States and Vietnam, when I'm in either country, I am better treated in Vietnam than I am in America. People in both the North and the South respect the position in Vietnam of the American soldier. They don't hold us accountable for the war. They hold Nixon, Kissinger, Johnson, the leaders of the country who make the war. They're the ones responsible for the damage. They don't hold the soldier responsible. And so the guilt and a lot of the emotions that a lot of American soldiers have had from that experience, if there was any way that they could ever get back to Vietnam for a week, 2 weeks max, they will find out, and I'm happy to help do this in any way, show up there or show them where to go or tell them what to do, or give them some ideas as to how to pull this off. But they will be better treated there, and I think if they'd been able to go there sooner, a lot of emotional issues and stress would have been avoided. Here in America, it doesn't really matter too much, and I have, in the past year or so, had events where I've explained to somebody, look, I've got a problem right now, and I appreciate your help on this, and there was no consideration whatsoever. In fact, they took advantage of the situation. So being a disabled vet in the United States from the war in Vietnam, this world over here has a real different perspective on it, and it's not a real healthy one as far as I'm concerned. So I would suggest if there's any chance, any possibility for people to go to Vietnam, the children of American veterans, some of them are getting over there, even though the dads aren't going because the dads feel too strongly about it. But the kids are finding out what it's like. A lot of Viet Q children, kids who were born here in America from their parents who had left Vietnam as boat people in the 70s or 80s, those kids are going back and finding their roots, finding their families are still over there. And it's a whole other cultural dimension for them. So, in time these things will shift. But because of the number of suicides of veterans, and I'm not going to debate the number. If there's one, there was too many. But these are issues, again, I think that came out of the emotional isolation and problems that we had out of the war and never got resolved. And I think if the vets were able to, if they will go back, and again, I'd be offering my services in whatever way I could to encourage that and tell them where to go and give them some ideas on how to get there and what to do. It would solve a lot of problems. It would do a lot of healing for American soldiers to be able to do that. And the Vietnamese people are very cordial. Again, they hold no grudges. I've not had one nasty look or word said to me as an American war veteran from the North or the South. And I with plenty of veterans on both ends, ARVN as well as NVA and DC. And, they've got some emotions just like we've got, but they don't direct them at the person, they direct them at the situation. And I've done a lot of beer drinking with a lot of soldiers from both sides of the war, and all of us seem to have the same issues. We're all soldiers, all veterans, and that seems to be the primary connection for all of us. Didn't matter really what side we were on. Once we get down to it, we all start, crying and laughing about the whole experience as we experienced it as soldiers. And so I wish somehow I could get that word out to a lot of people, and that's just kind of what I'm trying to do with my website or when I talk to people and do presentations and stuff. So maybe that's the kind of the last word I would have here is I hope Americans can heal, and this be one way to do it. I'm also concerned about the war in Iraq and the occupation and what that's causing and similar issues emotionally and traumatizing, and how we're treating those people as well. So that's the current issue. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop the machine right now, and we'll talk offline here.
Yes, my full name is George Theodore Engelmann III. Date of birth is January 3rd, 1947, in Bloomington, Indiana.
Okay, did you attend school in Bloomington?
I did. I attended schools in Indiana, Massachusetts, and New York State because my father was moving due to the Korean War. We were called up as an active reservist. We're stationed at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and started school there, and then returned to Bloomington, went to 3 or 4 schools in Bloomington, moved to Oneonta, New York in 57, moved to Johnstown, New York in 64. So I went to those schools, graduated from high school, Johnstown High, June 1965.
Okay, and did you attend college at that point?
I did attend the Fulton Montgomery Community College in Johnstown the fall of 65 until the end of that semester.